What did Jesus really look like? The truth might just shock you. For billions worldwide, Jesus of Nazareth is the heart of their faith, a figure painted in countless masterpieces and etched into our minds through art, film, and tradition. But what if those images are more fiction than fact? Today, we're diving deep into history, archaeology, and scripture to uncover the real face of Jesus and, trust me, it's not what you expect. Is it a painting from a church, a scene from a movie, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to know, and we'll come back to why those images matter later. Let's set the record straight. There's no first-century selfie of Jesus, no detailed sketch tucked away in a Jerusalem archive, but that doesn't mean we're clueless. By piecing together historical clues, cultural context, and even forensic science, we can paint a vivid picture of what Jesus likely looked like. And it's going to challenge those iconic images you've seen in stained glass or on prayer cards. First, let's ground ourselves in the world Jesus lived in. Born around 4206 BCE in Bethlehem, a small town in the Roman province of Judea, he grew up in Nazareth, a modest village in Galilee. Let's start with ethnicity. Jesus was a Semitic Jew, part of the same ethnic lineage as Abraham, Moses, and David. What did Semitic people in the ancient Middle East look like? Based on skeletal remains, ancient art, and texts from the period, they typically had olive to medium brown skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. This makes sense for a sun-soaked region where darker pigmentation protected against intense UV rays. So, the fair-skinned, blue-eyed Jesus of Renaissance paintings, that's more a reflection of European artists' imaginations than historical reality. Now, let's talk height and build. Archaeological evidence, like skeletons from sites near the Dead Sea, tells us the average man in Judea stood between 5 feet 1 inch and 5 feet 5 inches shorter than today's average. Diet played a big role here. Most people ate simple meals, bread, lentils, vegetables, and occasional fish or meat. Jesus, likely a carpenter before his ministry, would have been physically fit but not bulky. Carpenters in those days worked with hand tools, shaping wood and stone, so he probably had a lean, muscular frame from manual labor. What about his hair? Here's where things get interesting. Many of us picture Jesus with long, flowing locks, thanks to images like The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. Beards, however, were common among Jewish men, seen as a sign of maturity and adherence to tradition. Leviticus 19:27 even instructs against trimming the edges of a beard. So Jesus likely had one probably full but well-kept. Not the wild, unkempt style sometimes depicted. Clothing is another clue. Jesus wasn't walking around in a glowing white robe like a Hollywood prophet. As a Galilean Jew, he would have worn a simple tunic, likely made of wool or linen, reaching the knees or ankles. These were practical for the climate loose-fitting to stay cool, with earthy tones like brown or beige, as bright dyes were expensive and reserved for the wealthy. Over his tunic, he might have worn a mantle or cloak for warmth, especially during his travels. Sandals made of leather were standard footwear, designed for dusty roads and long walks. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Why do so many depictions of Jesus look so European? The answer lies in history, not scripture. Early Christian art, like the catacomb paintings from the 3rd century, didn't focus on realistic portraits. Instead, Jesus was often shown symbolically, as a shepherd or teacher, without specific facial features. By the Byzantine era, around the 4th and 5th centuries, artists began standardizing his image, often modeling him after figures like Zeus or Roman emperors, with long hair and a serene expression. These images were less about accuracy and more about conveying divinity. It was a natural tendency to make the divine relatable to local audiences. But it's why the Jesus of Western art often looks more like a Scandinavian poet than a Middle Eastern Jew. So, what happens when we strip away these artistic biases? In 2001, forensic anthropologist Richard Neve took a bold step. His skin was likely olive-toned, weathered from a life outdoors. This reconstruction was in Jesus himself. No single skull could be butted. The closest we've come to a historically accurate portrait, and it's a far cry from the ethereal figure in most churches. Let's turn to Scripture for more clues. The Bible is surprisingly silent on Jesus' appearance, which is telling. The Gospels focus on his teachings, not his looks, suggesting his physical form wasn't the point. But there are hints. Isaiah 53:2, often linked to the Messiah, says, "He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him." This implies Jesus didn't stand out physically. He blended in with the crowd, an ordinary-looking man whose power came from his words and actions, not his face. There's also the Shroud of Turin, a controversial relic some believe bears Jesus' image. The shroud shows a man about 5 feet 11 inches taller than the average Judean, with a beard and long hair. While it's fascinated believers for centuries, most scholars, including those at the Vatican, caution that its authenticity is unproven. Carbon dating from the 1980s suggests it's from the Middle Ages, though some argue the sample was contaminated. Either way, it's not a definitive source, but it's worth mentioning for its cultural impact. Now, let's tackle a fascinating angle. What did Jesus' contemporaries think of his appearance? The Romans, who ruled Judea, often described Jews as having distinct features: curly hair, prominent noses, sometimes in derogatory terms, but there's no record of Jesus being singled out for his looks, which supports the idea that he was unremarkable in appearance. Early Christian writers, like Origen in the 3rd century, even argued that Jesus' physical form was plain, emphasizing his spiritual beauty instead. So, why does all this matter? Because the way we picture Jesus shapes how we connect with him. If we imagine him as a European icon, we risk missing the historical reality of a Middle Eastern man who walked among fishermen, farmers, and outcasts. His ordinariness was part of his power. He was one of them, not a distant, idealized figure. Understanding this can make his life and message feel more real, more grounded. Before we wrap up, let us revisit that question from the start. What do you picture when you think of Jesus? Has this changed your perspective? Maybe you're realizing that Jesus in your mind was shaped more by art than by history. That's okay, it's a journey we're all on. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this conversation going. And if you found this dive into history eye-opening, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. In the end, Jesus' appearance wasn't what made him extraordinary. It was his words, his compassion, his sacrifice. But by peeling back the layers of tradition, we get closer to the man who walked those dusty roads 2,000 years ago, a man who looked like his people, lived like his people, and changed the world forever. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.